Unaware that his poor, abandoned ex is now married to an alpha king, he kicked her out of the fortress. The fortress walls of Blackstone Keep rose like jagged teeth against the grey autumn sky, their dark stones worn by centuries of wind and rain. Within those walls, Lady Eleanor Ashford had once believed she would spend the rest of her days as the wife of Sir Aldric Blackstone, commander of the northern garrison. She had been wrong. The great hall echoed with the sound of boots on stone as Aldric paced before the hearth, his jaw set in that familiar line of displeasure. Eleanor stood near the doorway, her hands clasped before her. The simple grey dress she wore a far cry from the fine silks she had brought to this marriage 3 years ago. Those silks had been sold piece by piece to pay for the fortress repairs that Aldric deemed more important than his wife's comfort. "You have brought me nothing but disappointment," Aldric said, his voice cold and measured. 3 years, Eleanor. 3 years without an heir. What use is a wife who cannot fulfill her most basic duty? If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything as we continue Eleanor's journey together. Eleanor's throat tightened, but she kept her chin level. "The physicians said—" "The physicians are fools," Aldric interrupted, turning to face her fully. His handsome features, which had once made her heart flutter, now seemed carved from the same unforgiving stone as his fortress. "Or perhaps they simply cannot admit that you are barren. Either way, I will not waste another season waiting for something that will never come." Behind Aldric, his steward Magnus shifted uncomfortably, his weathered face creased with what might have been sympathy. Eleanor had always found him kind, unlike so many of the other men who served her husband. "There is also the matter of Lady Rosalind," Aldric continued, and Eleanor felt her stomach drop. Lady Rosalind Thornfield, the daughter of the Duke of Eastmarch, had been visiting the fortress for the past month. Young, beautiful, and carrying with her a dowry that would replenish Blackstone's depleted coffers. "You intend to set me aside," Eleanor said quietly. It was not a question. "The bishop has agreed to annul our marriage on the grounds of your failure to produce an heir," Aldric replied. "You will leave Blackstone Keep at first light tomorrow. I am being generous in allowing you to take a horse and enough coin for a week's lodging. After that, you will need to find your own way." "A week's lodging?" Eleanor's voice finally broke. "Aldric, I have no family left. My father's estates were forfeit when he supported the wrong claimant to the throne. I have nowhere to go." "That is no longer my concern." Aldric turned back to the fire, dismissing her with his posture. "Magnus will see that you are given what I promised. Be grateful I am not sending you out with nothing but the clothes on your back." Eleanor looked at Magnus, who could not meet her eyes. She understood then that there would be no appeal, no mercy. Aldric Blackstone had made his decision, and like everything else about him, it was as immovable as the stones of his fortress. That night, Eleanor packed her few remaining possessions into a worn leather satchel. The small room she had occupied, moved from the Lord's chamber 6 months ago when Aldric decided her presence disturbed his sleep, felt even smaller in the dim candlelight. She had one decent dress left, a deep blue wool that had somehow escaped being sold. The rest were simple shifts and the grey dress she wore for daily tasks. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Magnus entered, carrying a small purse that clinked with coin. His expression was grim. "My lady," he said softly, "this is what the Lord has provided. 20 silver pieces. 20 silver pieces. Enough for a week at a modest inn, perhaps 2 if she was frugal. After that she would need to find work, though what work a discarded noblewoman could find, she did not know." "Magnus," Eleanor said, taking the purse with trembling fingers, "will you do me one kindness?" "If I can, my lady." "Tell me truly, did he ever love me, even at the beginning?" Magnus was silent for a long moment, and in that silence Eleanor found her answer. The steward finally spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "Lord Aldrich loved your dowry, my lady, and when that was gone, spent on his ambitions, he no longer saw value in keeping you. I am sorry. You deserved better." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Magnus bowed and left her alone with her grief. Dawn came cold and grey, mist rising from the valley below the fortress. Eleanor led the old mare that had been given to her, not her own horse, she noted, but the oldest and slowest in the stable, across the courtyard. A few servants watched from doorways, their faces sympathetic but silent. No one would risk Aldrich's displeasure by bidding her farewell. As she passed through the fortress gates, Eleanor heard laughter from an upper window, Lady Rosalind's high, musical laugh, followed by Aldrich's deeper chuckle. The sound cut deeper than any words could have. Eleanor urged the mare forward, down the winding road that led away from Blackstone Keep. She did not look back. Behind her, the fortress stood dark against the morning sky, its walls impenetrable and cold. Ahead lay uncertainty and fear, but also perhaps the possibility of something more than the hollow existence she had endured within those walls. The road stretched before her, disappearing into the autumn forest. Eleanor had no destination, no plan beyond surviving each day as it came. She was alone, cast out, with nothing but an old horse and 20 silver pieces to her name. But she was free of Aldrich Blackstone, and in that moment, cold and frightened as she was, Eleanor felt the first stirring of something she had not felt in years. Hope. The village of Thornwick was 3 days' ride from Blackstone Keep, nestled in a valley where the River Vend carved its lazy path through farmland and forest. Eleanor had stopped at 2 other villages along the way, but the inns were either too expensive or too rough for a woman travelling alone. Thornwick seemed promising, large enough to offer some anonymity, small enough that her coin might last a bit longer. The Copper Bell Inn sat at the edge of the village square, a sturdy building with a thatched roof and windows that glowed warmly in the evening dusk. Eleanor dismounted stiffly, her muscles aching from days in the saddle. The old mare seemed equally relieved to stop. The innkeeper, a broad woman with flour-dusted apron and sharp eyes, looked Eleanor up and down as she entered. "Need a room?" "Yes, please," Eleanor said, trying to sound confident, "and stabling for my horse. 2 silver pieces a night includes breakfast and supper. Stables another half-piece." Eleanor's heart sank. At that rate her money would last less than a week, but she was exhausted and had little choice. "I'll take it for 3 nights. The innkeeper's expression softened slightly. "You look done in. Come, I'll show you to your room, then you can have some stew. We eat plain but hearty here." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the square. Eleanor sank onto the bed, every bone in her body aching. For the first time since leaving Blackstone, she allowed herself to cry, not for Aldrich, who had never truly been hers, but for the life she had lost, the future she had imagined, the children she had wanted but never had. When her tears were spent, Eleanor washed her face in the basin and went downstairs. The common room was filling with locals, farmers and craftsmen coming in for their evening ale. Eleanor took a corner table, hoping to be overlooked. The stew was indeed plain but good, thick with root vegetables and chunks of mutton. As Eleanor ate, she listened to the conversations around her, talk of harvests and weather, gossip about the miller's daughter running off with a soldier, complaints about the tax collector who would arrive next week. "Heard King Aldwin's holding court in the capital," one man said, his voice carrying across the room. "They say he's looking for advisors, people who know about managing estates and such." "And what would the likes of us know about advising a king?" his companions scoffed. Eleanor's ears perked up at this. King Aldwin, the young king who had taken the throne 2 years ago after his father's death. She knew little about him, except that he was said to be fair-minded and had worked hard to stabilize the realm after years of unrest. An idea began to form in her mind, desperate and probably foolish. Eleanor had managed her father's estate before his death, had learned accounts and household management. She had even managed Blackstone Keep's ledgers, until Aldrich had decided that was not a wife's place. Perhaps, if she could reach the capital, she might find work in some noble household. It was a slim chance, but it was something. The next morning, Eleanor asked the innkeeper about the road to the capital. "Riverstone? That's a good 10 days' ride. Maybe more on that old nag you've got." The innkeeper studied her. "You running from something, dear?" "Running toward something, I hope," Eleanor replied quietly. The innkeeper nodded slowly. "There's a merchant caravan leaving tomorrow, heading to Riverstone. They might let you travel with them for safety. As for Master Brennan, he's the lead merchant, fair man usually." Eleanor found Master Brennan in the village square, overseeing the loading of wagons. He was a middle-aged man with a merchant's shrewd eyes and a surprisingly kind smile. "Travel with us?" He considered her request. "Can you ride well enough to keep up?" "Yes." "And you've got coin for food and lodging along the way?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. She would make it work somehow. 3 silver pieces to travel with the caravan," Brennan said. "That buys you the protection of my guards and the right to camp with us. You provide your own food and supplies." 3 silver pieces, nearly a quarter of what she had left. But traveling alone was dangerous, especially for a woman. Eleanor handed over the coins. The caravan left at dawn the next day. A train of 6 wagons carrying wool, leather goods, and pottery. There were 2 other travelers besides Eleanor, a priest heading to the capital to petition the bishop, and a young scribe seeking employment. Neither paid her much attention, for which Eleanor was grateful. The days on the road settled into a rhythm. They traveled from dawn until late afternoon, stopping at villages or making camp in clearings along the way. Eleanor learned to pitch her small tent, to cook simple meals over a fire, to care for her horse without help. Skills she had never needed at Blackstone, where servants had done everything. On the 5th day, as they stopped to water the horses at a stream, one of the guards approached Eleanor. He was young, maybe 20, with a friendly face. "My lady," he said, then caught himself. "Sorry, miss, I'm Owen. I've been meaning to ask, are you seeking work in Riverstone?" Eleanor nodded cautiously. "My sister works in the household of Lord Pemberton, one of the king's councillors. She mentioned they're looking for a housekeeper. If you're interested, I could give you her name. She might put in a word for you." A housekeeper. It was so far below her former station that Eleanor felt a momentary surge of pride rebel against the idea. But pride would not feed her or keep a roof over her head. "I would be grateful for the introduction," she said. Owen smiled. "My sister's name is Margaret. Tell her I sent you. Lord Pemberton's house is on Merchant Street, the one with the blue door." That evening, as Eleanor sat by the campfire mending a tear in her cloak, Master Brennan joined her. "Your quality," he said without preamble. "Trying to hide it. But I can tell. The way you sit, the way you speak. What are you running from?" Eleanor's hands stilled on the needle. "A marriage that ended badly." Brennan nodded, asking no more questions. "Word of advice, if you'll take it. When you get to Riverstone, don't hide what you are. Use it. A lady who's fallen on hard times but kept her dignity and skills. That's valuable to the right household. Better than pretending to be something you're not." "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. On the 8th day, they crested a hill, and Eleanor saw Riverstone spread out below them. The capital city sprawled along both banks of the great river, its walls encompassing markets and merchant quarters, noble estates and common tenements. At the city's heart rose the royal palace, its white stone towers gleaming in the afternoon sun. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. Somewhere in that vast city, she would have to forge a new life. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The caravan entered the city through the southern gate, the guards waving them through with barely a glance. The streets were crowded and noisy, full of people going about their business. Eleanor had never seen so many people in one place. Master Brennan's caravan made its way to the merchants' quarter, where the wagons would be unloaded and their goods sold. As they entered the courtyard of a large warehouse, Brennan turned to Eleanor. "This is where we part ways. The Broken Crown Inn is 2 streets over, clean and reasonably priced. Owen will show you the way to Lord Pemberton's house tomorrow if you'd like." "Thank you, Master Brennan," Eleanor said, "for everything." Brennan smiled. "Good luck, my lady. I think you'll do just fine." The Broken Crown was indeed clean and not too expensive, 3 silver pieces for a week's lodging. Eleanor paid it, calculating that she had perhaps 9 silver pieces left. Enough for 3 weeks if she was very careful, less if she needed to buy food. She needed to find work quickly. That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the sounds of the city outside her window, Eleanor allowed herself to think of Aldrich for the first time in days. Did he wonder where she was? Did he feel any regret for what he had done? She doubted it. By now, he was likely married to Lady Rosalind, already planning for the heir Eleanor had failed to give him. The thought brought a pang, but not the crushing pain she had expected. Instead, Eleanor felt something like relief. She was free of Aldrich's cold indifference, free of the fortress that had become her prison. Whatever happened next, it would be by her own choices, not his. She fell asleep with that thought, and for the first time in years, she did not dream of Blackstone Keep. Eleanor stood before the blue door on Merchant Street, her heart pounding in her throat. She had dressed in her best remaining gown, the deep blue wool that was slightly worn but still presentable, and pinned her dark hair up in a simple but neat style. She looked, she hoped, like a woman who had known better days but maintained her dignity. Margaret, Owen's sister, had agreed to meet her at the servants' entrance. She was a plump, cheerful woman about Eleanor's age, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "So, you're the lady Owen told me about," Margaret said, looking Eleanor up and down. "He said you were quality, but down on your luck." "That's accurate," Eleanor said quietly. Margaret nodded. "All right then. Lord Pemberton's housekeeper, Mrs. Hartley, is getting old and her joints pain her something terrible. She could use help with the heavier tasks. Can you manage a household, keep accounts, oversee staff?" "Yes," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "I managed my father's estate and my husband's keep." "Your husband's keep?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "You were married to a lord." "I was." It ended. Margaret was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I won't pry. Come on then, let's see if Mrs. Hartley will take you on." Lord Pemberton's house was elegant but not ostentatious. 3 stories of pale stone with tall windows and a small garden. Inside, the rooms were well appointed, the floors polished, everything in its place. Eleanor felt a pang of longing for the order and beauty she had once taken for granted. Mrs. Hartley was a thin, grey-haired woman with sharp features softened by the pain Eleanor could see in how she moved. The older woman studied Eleanor with penetrating eyes. "Margaret says you've managed households before," Mrs. Hartley said. "What can you tell me about organizing a staff of 15, planning meals for noble guests, and keeping accounts?" Eleanor took a breath and began to explain the systems she had used at her father's estate, how she had organized the household by task, how she had planned menus seasonally to keep costs down, how she had maintained ledgers that tracked every expenditure. As she spoke, she saw Mrs. Hartley's expression change from skeptical to interested to approving. "You're overqualified for a housekeeper's assistant," Mrs. Hartley said bluntly. "What happened?" "My marriage ended badly," Eleanor said, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "I was cast out with almost nothing. I need work, Mrs. Hartley. I'm willing to start at whatever position you'll give me and prove my worth." Mrs. Hartley was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. "2 silver pieces a week, plus room and board. You'll assist me with the household management and take over the heavier tasks. If you prove yourself, we'll discuss a permanent position as housekeeper when I retire next spring." 2 silver pieces a week. It was far less than Eleanor had once spent on ribbons, but it meant stability, safety, a chance to rebuild. "I accept," she said. "Good. You can start tomorrow. Margaret will show you to your room." The servants' quarters were on the 3rd floor, small but comfortable rooms tucked under the eaves. Eleanor's room had a narrow bed, a chest for her belongings, and a tiny window that looked out over the rooftops of Riverstone. It was the smallest room she had ever occupied, but it was hers, earned by her own merit. That night, as Eleanor lay in her new bed, she thought of how far she had fallen, from lady of a fortress to servant in a noble household. Yet somehow she felt more herself than she had in years. At Blackstone she had been useless, discarded. Here she would have a purpose. The next weeks passed in a blur of work. Eleanor threw herself into her duties, learning the routines of Lord Pemberton's household, memorizing the preferences of the family, organizing the staff with quiet efficiency. Mrs. Hartley watched her with approval, gradually delegating more responsibilities. Lord Pemberton himself Eleanor rarely saw, though she heard him often enough. He was a serious man in his 50s, one of King Aldwyn's closest advisers, frequently away at court. His wife, Lady Catherine, was gracious and kind, the sort of mistress who treated her servants with respect. It was during her 3rd week that Eleanor first encountered someone from her former life. She was in the market, purchasing vegetables for the evening meal, when she heard a familiar voice. "Eleanor? Eleanor Ashford?" Eleanor turned to see Lady Anne Sinclair, who had been a friend during Eleanor's brief time at court before her marriage. Anne looked much the same, elegant, fashionable, her expression a mixture of shock and pity. "Anne!" Eleanor said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment at being seen in her plain servant's dress, a basket over her arm. "Is it true?" Anne asked quietly, drawing Eleanor aside. "I heard rumours that Aldrich Blackstone had set you aside, but I didn't believe—" She stopped, taking in Eleanor's appearance. "Oh, Eleanor." "It's true," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "I work for Lord Pemberton now." "It's honest employment." Anne's expression was troubled. "Does Aldrich know where you are? What you've—" "Aldrich doesn't care where I am," Eleanor interrupted. "He made that very clear when he cast me out. Please, Anne, if you have any kindness for me, don't speak of this to anyone." Anne hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Of course, I won't say anything, but Eleanor, if you need help—" "I don't," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm managing on my own." After Anne left, Eleanor stood in the market for a long moment, her hands trembling. The encounter had shaken her, reminding her of everything she had lost. But it had also reminded her of something else. She had survived. She was building a new life, different from what she had imagined, but her own nonetheless. Winter came to Riverstone, bringing cold winds and grey skies. Eleanor had been with Lord Pemberton's household for 3 months when Mrs. Hartley called her into the housekeeper's office. "Lord Pemberton is hosting a dinner next week," Mrs. Hartley said. "Important guests from court. I need you to oversee the preparations, plan the menu, organize the service, manage everything." Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. "Me?" "You've proven yourself more than capable," Mrs. Hartley said with a slight smile. "And my joints are particularly bad this week. I trust you to handle it." Eleanor threw herself into the preparations, planning a menu that would impress without seeming extravagant, training the younger servants in proper service, ensuring every detail was perfect. The night of the dinner, she stood in the hallway outside the dining room, her heart pounding as she listened to the service proceed smoothly. When it was over and the guests had departed, Lord Pemberton himself came to find her. "Mrs. Hartley tells me you organized tonight's dinner." "Yes, my lord." "It was excellent. The best meal we've served in this house in years." Lord Pemberton studied her with interest. "You're wasted as an assistant housekeeper. When Mrs. Hartley retires, the position will be yours if you want it." "Thank you, my lord," Eleanor said, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. That night, lying in her small room under the eaves, Eleanor thought of Aldrich and Blackstone Keep. She wondered if Aldrich's new wife had given him the heir he wanted, if he ever thought of the woman he had cast out so carelessly. Then she pushed the thoughts away. That life was behind her. This life, hard as it was hers. She fell asleep with a smile on her face. Spring came late to Riverstone, the last snows melting reluctantly from the streets. Eleanor had been with Lord Pemberton's household for 6 months, and the work had become second nature. Mrs. Hartley had formally retired the previous month, and Eleanor had taken over as head housekeeper with a salary of 5 silver pieces a week, enough to begin saving, to think about the future beyond just surviving each day. Eleanor was in the kitchen overseeing breakfast preparations when Margaret burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "Eleanor, you have to see this. The Royal Guards are in the street." "Royal Guards?" Eleanor followed Margaret to the front of the house, where a small crowd of servants had gathered at the windows. A procession was making its way down Merchant Street, a dozen mounted guards in the king's colours, and in their midst a closed carriage bearing the royal seal. Eleanor's heart quickened. The king himself rarely travelled through the merchant quarter. Something unusual was happening. "Lord Pemberton said the king's looking for someone," one of the footmen whispered. "Some woman who disappeared months ago." Eleanor felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Could Aldrich have petitioned the king for something? But why would the king care about a discarded wife? The procession stopped 3 houses down, and Eleanor watched as guards knocked on doors, spoke to servants, moved on. They were searching for someone. The carriage remained in the street, its curtains drawn. "Back to work, all of you," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We have duties to attend to." But as the morning wore on, Eleanor found herself distracted, jumping at every sound. When Margaret came to find her in the linen room, Eleanor nearly dropped the sheet she was folding. "Eleanor, there are royal guards at the door. They're asking for you." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "For me, by name?" Margaret nodded, her eyes wide. "Lord Pemberton sent me to fetch you. He's with them in the entrance hall." Eleanor's mind raced as she descended the stairs. What could the royal guards possibly want with her? Had Aldrich done something? Was she in some kind of trouble? In the entrance hall, Lord Pemberton stood with 2 royal guards and a tall man in the king's colours who was clearly someone of importance. They turned as Eleanor entered, and she saw Lord Pemberton's expression of confusion and concern. "Eleanor," Lord Pemberton said carefully, "this is Lord Marshal Garrett. He says he's been searching for you on behalf of the king." Eleanor curtsied, her heart hammering. "My lord, there must be some mistake. I'm no one of importance." Lord Marshal Garrett studied her with keen eyes. "You are Lady Eleanor Ashford, formerly Lady Blackstone, daughter of the late Lord Thomas Ashford." "Yes," Eleanor said quietly, "but I hold no titles now. My marriage was annulled, my father's estates were forfeit." "Your father's estates were wrongly forfeit," Garrett interrupted. "King Aldwin has been reviewing cases from the succession conflicts. Your father was loyal to the rightful king, Lady Eleanor. The estates should never have been taken. His Majesty wishes to restore them to you and offer his personal apology for the injustice done to your family." Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "Restore them? But that's impossible. They've been held by Lord Thornfield for years." "Lord Thornfield has been compensated and has relinquished all claims," Garrett said. "The estates are yours, Lady Eleanor, along with all revenues from the past 3 years that were wrongfully denied to you. His Majesty requests your presence at court this afternoon to formalize the restoration." Eleanor's mind reeled. Her father's estates, the beautiful lands in the river valley, the manor house where she had grown up, the farms and villages that had provided her family's wealth for generations, restored, hers again. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why now? Why search for me?" "The king has been working to right the wrongs of the succession conflicts," Garrett explained. "When his clerks reviewed your father's case, they found clear evidence of his loyalty. They tried to locate you at Blackstone Keep, only to be told by Sir Aldrich that you had left months ago and he did not know where you had gone. It has taken us weeks to track you down." Eleanor felt a bitter laugh rising in her throat. Aldrich, who had cast her out without a thought, had sent away the king's men who might have restored her fortune. Had he known what they wanted? Had he kept the information from her deliberately? Lord Pemberton was staring at her. "You were Lady Blackstone." "For 3 years," Eleanor said quietly, "until my husband set me aside." "Lord Pemberton," Garrett said, "I trust Lady Eleanor's service has been satisfactory?" "More than satisfactory," Pemberton said slowly. "She has been an excellent housekeeper, the best I've had." Garrett smiled slightly. "I suspect she will no longer be in your employ, my lord. Lady Eleanor, will you accompany me to the palace? The king is most eager to make amends." Eleanor looked around the entrance hall of the house that had been her sanctuary for the past 6 months, at Lord Pemberton, who had given her employment when she had nothing, at Margaret, watching from the doorway with amazement on her face, at the life she had built from the ashes of her marriage. "Yes," she said finally, "I will come." An hour later, Eleanor sat in the royal carriage as it made its way through the streets of Riverstone toward the palace. She wore the blue wool dress that was her finest garment, laughably inadequate for a royal audience, but it was all she had. Garrett had assured her it would not matter. The palace was even more magnificent up close, its white stone towers reaching toward the spring sky. Eleanor was led through corridors lined with tapestries and paintings, past courtiers in rich silks who stared at her plain dress with curiosity. They stopped before a set of carved doors. Garrett turned to her. "His Majesty is waiting. Are you ready?" Eleanor took a deep breath and nodded. The doors opened, and she was led into a private audience chamber. It was not the throne room, but a smaller, more intimate space with a fire burning in the hearth and windows overlooking the palace gardens. A man stood by the windows, his back to the door. "Your Majesty," Garrett announced, "Lady Eleanor Ashford." The man turned, and Eleanor's breath caught. King Aldwin was not what she had expected. She had imagined an older man, stern and formal, but the king could not have been more than 30. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and grey eyes that seemed to see everything. His face was handsome but serious, marked by the weight of responsibility. He smiled as she curtsied deeply, and his whole face transformed. "Lady Eleanor, please, rise. I'm glad we finally found you." Eleanor rose, her hands trembling slightly. "Your Majesty is too kind." Aldwin gestured to a chair near the fire. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." He waited until she was seated, then took the chair opposite. His manner was informal, putting her at ease despite the strangeness of the situation. "First, I must apologize on behalf of the Crown for the injustice done to your father. Lord Thomas Ashford was a loyal subject who supported my father during the succession disputes. He should have been rewarded, not punished. My father believed in doing what was right, regardless of the cost, Eleanor said softly. A rare quality, Aldwin said. His estates have been restored to you, along with 3 years of back revenues, approximately 3,000 gold crowns. The steward, who has been managing the estates, reports them in excellent condition. You may take possession immediately. 3,000 gold crowns. Eleanor had been surviving on silver pieces, carefully counting every expenditure. The sum was staggering. Your Majesty is generous beyond measure, she managed. It is only justice, Aldwin replied. But there is another matter. Lord Marshal Garrett tells me you have been working as a housekeeper for Lord Pemberton, that you left Blackstone Keep with almost nothing. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. Yes, Your Majesty. My marriage ended badly. I needed employment to survive. Aldwin's expression darkened. Sir Aldrich Blackstone cast you out while knowing that the king's men sought you, knowing that you were about to be restored to your rightful inheritance? I don't know what Aldrich knew, Eleanor said carefully. He annulled our marriage because I did not give him an heir. He has since married Lady Rosalind Thornfield. Rosalind Thornfield, Aldwin repeated thoughtfully. The daughter of the Duke who has been rather vocal in his criticism of certain royal policies. How convenient for Blackstone to ally himself with that family. There was something in the king's tone that made Eleanor look at him more closely. Your Majesty. Aldwin seemed to shake himself. Forgive me, court politics. He smiled again, that transforming smile that made him seem younger. Tell me, Lady Eleanor, what are your plans now? Will you return to your estates? I don't know, Eleanor admitted. Everything has happened so quickly. This morning I was folding linens. Now I'm speaking with the king about estates and inheritances. Aldwin laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. Life does have a way of changing suddenly. I know something about that. One day I was the king's second son, content to manage my own estates and avoid court intrigue. Then my brother died, and suddenly I was heir to the throne. I'm sorry for your loss, Eleanor said quietly. Thank you. Aldwin's expression grew serious. It was 3 years ago now. I had to learn very quickly how to be king, how to navigate the politics and power struggles. I made mistakes. I'm still making them, I'm sure. But I try to do what is right, as your father did. They talked for another hour, about her father's estates, about the management of lands and households, about the work she had done for Lord Pemberton. Eleanor found herself relaxing in the king's presence, his genuine interest and understanding putting her at ease. He asked intelligent questions about estate management, listened carefully to her answers, offered insights from his own experience. You have a good mind for this, Aldwin said at one point. Lord Pemberton was fortunate to have you. I was fortunate that he gave me a chance, Eleanor replied. When I arrived in Riverstone, I had almost nothing and no prospects. His household became my sanctuary. Aldwin was quiet for a moment, studying her with those perceptive grey eyes. You survived being cast out with nothing, found employment, built a new life through your own skills and determination. That takes remarkable strength, Lady Eleanor. Or desperation, Eleanor said with a slight smile. Desperation might begin the journey, Aldwin said, but it takes strength to see it through. Many in your position would have given up. When Eleanor finally left the palace, it was late afternoon. Garrett had arranged for her belongings to be collected from Lord Pemberton's house, and for a suite of rooms to be prepared for her at a noble guest house near the palace. Everything was happening so fast that Eleanor felt dizzy with it all. His Majesty would like you to dine with him tomorrow evening, Garrett said as they walked back through the palace corridors. to discuss the details of your estate restoration and to introduce you to the court. Dine with the king? Eleanor's voice came out higher than she intended. Garrett smiled. His Majesty does not stand on ceremony as much as some kings. He prefers to know the people he works with. Consider it a working dinner, if that makes it less daunting. Less daunting. Eleanor was going to have dinner with the king. The thought was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. That night, in her comfortable rooms at the guest house, Eleanor sat by the window looking out over the city. Somewhere out there was Lord Pemberton's house, where just this morning she had been folding linens and planning menus. That life seemed impossibly distant now. And somewhere beyond the city walls was Blackstone Keep, where Aldrich was no doubt sleeping soundly beside his new wife, unaware that the woman he had cast out as worthless was now restored to wealth and favour with the king. Eleanor thought she should feel triumph at that, should want revenge, or at least vindication. But all she felt was a strange emptiness. The restoration of her estates changed her circumstances, but it did not heal the wounds of rejection, the knowledge that she had been deemed worthless and discarded. She fell asleep wondering what tomorrow would bring, what it meant to be Lady Eleanor Ashford again, after so many months of being simply Eleanor, a servant trying to survive. The court tailor arrived early the next morning with an array of fabrics and patterns that made Eleanor's head spin. By the tailor's calculations, she would need at least a dozen new gowns, formal court dresses, day dresses, riding habits, evening wear. Eleanor, who had been carefully counting silver pieces just days ago, found the extravagance almost overwhelming. "His Majesty has requested that you be outfitted properly," the tailor said, measuring her waist. "He does not wish you to feel uncomfortable at court due to inadequate wardrobe." For the evening's dinner, a dress was hastily altered from the tailor's ready stock, a gown of deep emerald silk with gold embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. When Eleanor saw herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. The dress transformed her from a servant into a lady once more. A maid arrived to help with her hair, pinning it up in an elegant style and weaving gold ribbon through the dark strands. Eleanor's hands trembled as she fastened the simple gold necklace that had been her mother's, one of the few pieces of jewelry she had managed to keep. "You look beautiful, my lady," the maid said shyly. Beautiful. Eleanor had not felt beautiful in a very long time. Lord Marshal Garrett himself came to escort her to the palace. As they walked through the corridors, Eleanor noticed the stares of courtiers, the whispered conversations. Word had spread quickly about the king's restoration of her estates, about the lost lady who had been working as a servant. "They're curious," Garrett said quietly, noting her discomfort. "Your story is unusual. They wonder what kind of woman could fall so far and rise again." "I wonder that myself sometimes," Eleanor admitted. The private dining room was smaller and more intimate than Eleanor had expected. A table set for two, candles casting warm light, windows showing the palace gardens in the spring twilight. King Aldwin stood as she entered, and his expression when he saw her made Eleanor's breath catch. "Lady Eleanor," he said softly, "you look magnificent." Eleanor curtsied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Your Majesty is too kind. The dress is borrowed." "The dress is just cloth," Aldwin said. "It is how you carry yourself that makes you magnificent." He gestured to the table. "Please, shall we dine?" The meal was simpler than Eleanor had expected. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, spring vegetables, good wine, but not ostentatious. Aldwin explained that he preferred simple fare to the elaborate court banquets that his father had favored. "I grew up eating in the great hall with my father's knights," he said. "I never developed a taste for 12-course meals with birds dressed up to look alive again." Eleanor laughed, surprised by his humor. "My father felt the same. He said that too much ceremony got in the way of actually tasting the food. They talked easily, the conversation flowing from topic to topic. Aldwyn asked about her father's estates, and Eleanor described the lands she remembered, the river valley with its fertile farms, the forests where she had ridden as a girl, the villages where people had known her name. "It sounds beautiful," Aldwyn said. "You must be eager to return." "I am," Eleanor said, then hesitated, "though I confess it feels strange. I spent so long believing that life was lost to me forever. Now that it's restored, I hardly know what to do with it." "Felt something similar when I became king," Aldwyn said. "I had lived my whole life as the spare heir, free to manage my own estates and avoid court politics. Then suddenly I was king, and everyone was looking to me for answers I didn't have." He smiled ruefully. "I still don't have all the answers, but I've learned that sometimes we grow into the roles we're given." "Did you want to be king?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. That was improper." "It was honest," Aldwyn said. "And no, I didn't want it. I loved my brother. I would have been content to let him rule while I managed my estates and read books, but that choice was taken from me." His expression grew distant. "We don't always get to choose our paths, do we? Sometimes life forces us down roads we never imagined walking." Eleanor thought of Aldrich, of being cast out of Blackstone Keep, of the long road to Riverstone. "No," she said quietly. "Sometimes we don't." Aldwyn looked at her with such understanding that Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Here was someone who truly comprehended what it meant to have your life torn apart and remade into something unrecognizable. "Tell me about working for Lord Pemberton," Aldwyn said, changing the subject with kindness. "What was it like?" Eleanor found herself describing those months. The satisfaction of managing a household well, the pleasure of small accomplishments, the comfort of honest work. She told him about Mrs. Hartley, about Margaret and Owen, about learning to fold linens and manage accounts and plan meals. "You made a life for yourself," Aldwyn said. "Against all odds, you survived and thrived. That's extraordinary, Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her given name without her title. Eleanor felt something shift in the air between them, something warm and dangerous, and entirely inappropriate, given their respective positions. "Your Majesty," she began. "Aldwyn," he interrupted gently. "When we're alone, please call me Aldwyn. I have enough people bowing and scraping. I would like to have at least one conversation that feels real." Eleanor met his eyes and saw the loneliness there, the weight of crown and duty. "Aldwyn," she said softly, testing the name. "Thank you for this evening, for everything. You've given me back a life I thought was lost." "You earned it," Aldwyn said. "Your father's loyalty, your own strength and determination. These things have value, Eleanor. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." They talked late into the evening, the candles burning low. Eleanor learned about Aldwyn's childhood, his studies, his love of history and philosophy. He learned about her father, her brief time at court before her marriage, the 3 difficult years at Blackstone Keep. "Aldrich Blackstone is a fool," Aldwyn said at one point, his voice hard, "to cast you aside for something that was likely not even your fault. The physicians say such things are often a matter of chance, or due to the husband as much as the wife." "He needed an heir," Eleanor said. "I understand that, even if I can't forgive how he handled it." "An heir," Aldwyn repeated bitterly. "The court reminds me daily that I need to marry and produce heirs, as if I am simply a breeding stallion rather than a man." Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "You're not married?" "No." Aldwyn's smile was rueful. "I was betrothed as a young man, but she died of fever before we could marry. Since then the council has been pushing me to choose a bride." They have a list of appropriate candidates, princesses and duchesses, all perfect on parchment, and all strangers to me. That sounds lonely, Eleanor said softly. It is. Aldwyn met her eyes. Which is why evenings like this, conversations with someone who sees me as more than just a crown and a title, are precious to me. The intensity in his gaze made Eleanor's heart race. She looked away, suddenly aware of how dangerous this conversation was becoming. She was a recently annulled woman. He was a king who needed to marry well. Nothing good could come of the feelings stirring between them. "It's late," she said quietly. "I should return to my rooms." Aldwyn nodded, but she saw disappointment in his eyes. "Of course, Lord Marshal Garrett will escort you." He stood as she rose. "Eleanor, would you consider remaining in Riverstone for a few more weeks? I could use your advice on some estate management matters, and it would give you time to prepare before travelling to take possession of your lands." It was a thin excuse, and they both knew it, but Eleanor found herself nodding. "I would be happy to help however I can, Your Majesty." "Aldwyn," he reminded her gently. "Aldwyn," she repeated, the name feeling like a secret between them. As Eleanor walked back to her rooms, Garrett beside her, she tried to steady her racing thoughts. She had dined with the king. She had called him by his given name, and unless she was very much mistaken, King Aldwyn had feelings for her that went far beyond simple kindness to a wronged subject. The thought was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Eleanor spent her mornings meeting with lawyers and stewards, learning the details of her restored estates. Her afternoons were taken up with the seemingly endless work of establishing herself in court society, paying calls on noble ladies, attending teas and afternoon gatherings, navigating the complex social hierarchies that governed Riverstone's elite. And her evenings, more often than not, she spent with Aldwyn. They dined together several times a week, always in private, always with the excuse of discussing estate management or court business. But their conversations ranged far beyond such practical matters. They talked about books and philosophy, about justice and duty, about their hopes and fears. Eleanor found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. Her grief over her father's death, her loneliness at Blackstone Keep, her fear during those first days in Riverstone when she had nothing and no prospects. Aldwyn shared his own struggles, the weight of kingship, the loneliness of his position, his frustration with court politics and noble factions. He spoke of his brother with love and sorrow, of the burden of filling shoes he had never expected to wear. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing any good," he said one evening. "I try to be just, to help those who have been wronged, to strengthen the realm. But there is so much resistance to change, so many who benefit from the old ways." "You restored my father's estates," Eleanor said softly. "You righted a wrong that no one else cared about. That's not nothing, Aldwyn." He smiled at her, and Eleanor's heart ached with feelings she knew were dangerous. She was falling in love with the king. It was foolish and impossible, but she could not seem to stop herself. The court noticed, of course. Eleanor began to hear whispers, to see the speculative looks from courtiers. Lady Anne Sinclair, whom Eleanor had encountered in the market months ago, sought her out at a court function. "Eleanor," Anne said, drawing her aside, "people are talking about you and the king." "We're friends," Eleanor said, though the word felt inadequate. "You dine together alone several times a week," Anne said bluntly. "The king looks at you like you're the sun and moon combined, and you look at him the same way." Eleanor felt heat rise to her face. "Anne, I'm not judging," Anne interrupted. "I think it's wonderful, actually. The king has been so isolated, so lonely. You make him happy. Anyone can see that." She hesitated. "But Eleanor, you need to be careful. There are factions at court who would not be pleased to see the king marry a woman with no political connections, especially one who was previously married and set aside. The king has not proposed marriage, Eleanor said quickly. Not yet, Anne said meaningfully. But Eleanor, he will. I know it as surely as I know my own name, and when he does, you need to be prepared for the storm that will follow. Eleanor thought about Anne's words that night. Was Aldwyn considering marriage? The thought sent her heart soaring and plummeting in equal measure. She loved him, she could admit that to herself now, but was love enough? Could she be queen? Could she survive the political battles that would surely come? The answer came the next evening, when Aldwyn asked her to walk with him in the palace gardens. It was a perfect spring night, the air warm and sweet with the scent of flowers. They walked in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in a way that felt both natural and precious. Eleanor, Aldwyn said finally, stopping beside a fountain, I need to tell you something. Eleanor's heart began to pound. What is it? The council has given me an ultimatum, Aldwyn said, his voice tight with frustration. They say I must choose a bride within the next 2 months, or they will choose one for me. They've arranged for several foreign princesses to visit, for me to meet the Duchess's daughters, for the entire tedious process of royal matchmaking. Eleanor felt something break inside her. I see. No, Aldwyn said urgently, taking her hands. You don't see. Eleanor, I don't want any of those women. I don't want a political alliance or a strategic marriage. I want... He stopped, took a breath. I want someone I can talk to, someone who understands me, someone who makes me feel like a man instead of just a king. Aldwyn, I want you, he said simply. Eleanor, I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since the moment you walked into that audience chamber in your worn blue dress and met my eyes without fear. He squeezed her hands. I know this is complicated. I know you've been hurt before, that marriage to me would bring scrutiny and pressure you never asked for, but I'm asking anyway, will you marry me? Will you be my queen? Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. I'm not suitable. The council will say... I don't care what the council says, Aldwyn interrupted fiercely. You are a lady in your own right, daughter of a loyal lord, proven in your strength and wisdom. You are more than suitable. You are everything I could want. I can't give you an heir, Eleanor whispered. Aldrich said... Aldrich was wrong about many things, Aldwyn said gently. But even if he was right about that, I don't care. There are other heirs, other possibilities. I would rather have you and no children than anyone else, and a dozen heirs. Eleanor looked up at him through her tears. In his eyes she saw love and certainty, the same strength that had helped him bear the weight of the crown. And she thought of how far she had come, from Blackstone Keep to Riverstone, from servant to lady, from despair to hope. Yes, she whispered, yes, I'll marry you. Aldwyn pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor felt something inside her heal, something she hadn't even realized was still broken. In his embrace, she was not the woman Aldrich had cast aside as worthless. She was simply Eleanor, loved and valued for herself. I love you, Aldwyn murmured against her hair. My clever, strong Eleanor. My queen. Eleanor held him tighter, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had drawn her from the first. I love you too. They stood there in the garden for a long time, holding each other while the stars came out overhead and the night birds sang in the trees. And Eleanor thought that perhaps life's unexpected roads sometimes led to places more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. The announcement of the king's betrothal caused an uproar at court, exactly as Anne had predicted. Several of the more powerful nobles objected vehemently to Aldwyn's choice of a previously married woman with no significant political connections. There were heated council meetings, threats of withdrawal of support, even whispers of rebellion. Aldwyn faced them all with calm determination. "Lady Eleanor is my choice," he said in the throne room, his voice carrying to every corner. "She is a woman of noble birth, proven wisdom, and strength of character. Those who question her worthiness question my judgment as king, and that, my lords, is a dangerous position to take." The subtle threat was enough to quiet most of the opposition, though Eleanor knew that winning the noble's support would be a longer battle. What helped more than anything was Aldwyn's obvious devotion and Eleanor's own grace under pressure. She bore the scrutiny and whispers with dignity, learning the complex politics of court, winning allies through her intelligence and kindness. Lord Pemberton was among the first to congratulate them, arriving at the palace with a broad smile. "I always knew you were destined for greater things than managing my household," he told Eleanor. "Though I confess I didn't anticipate quite how great." Eleanor laughed, grateful for his support. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing." "I won't forget that." "Nor will I forget how well you served," Pemberton replied. "You'll make an excellent queen, Lady Eleanor." The wedding was planned for midsummer, giving time for the preparations such an event required. Eleanor threw herself into learning everything she would need to know as queen: the protocols and ceremonies, the political alliances and tensions, the history and traditions of the realm. Aldwyn helped her, patiently explaining, introducing her to his trusted advisors, ensuring she would be prepared. 3 weeks before the wedding, a messenger arrived at the palace with urgent news. Sir Aldric Blackstone had come to Riverstone and was requesting an audience with King Aldwyn. Eleanor felt her stomach drop when she heard. She had not seen or heard from Aldric since the day he cast her out. What could he possibly want now? Aldwyn's expression was cold when he received the news. "Does he know about our betrothal?" "Everyone knows about it, Your Majesty," the messenger said. "It's been the talk of the realm for weeks." "Then Blackstone knows he cast aside the woman who would be queen," Aldwyn said grimly. "How convenient that he wishes an audience now." He looked at Eleanor. "You don't have to see him." "I want to," Eleanor said quietly. "I need to face him one more time, to show him, and myself, that I am no longer the woman he discarded." Aldwyn studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but I will be present. He will address you with the respect due to my queen, or he will answer to me." The audience was arranged for the next afternoon in one of the palace's formal receiving rooms. Eleanor dressed carefully in a gown of royal blue silk, her hair pinned up with jeweled combs, a gold chain with the royal seal around her neck. She looked every inch the queen she was about to become. When Aldric was shown in, Eleanor saw the shock on his face. He had expected to see the broken, desperate woman he had cast out. Instead, he faced a lady radiant with confidence and love, standing beside the king himself. Aldric bowed deeply, his movements stiff. "Your Majesty, Lady Eleanor." "Sir Aldric," Aldwyn said coldly, "you requested this audience. State your business." Aldric's eyes kept darting to Eleanor, confusion and something like regret warring in his expression. "I came to offer my congratulations on your Majesty's betrothal, and to speak with Lady Eleanor, if she will permit it." "Speak," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I am listening." Aldric seemed to struggle for words. "I heard that you had been restored to your estates, that the king had been searching for you while you were still at Blackstone. Eleanor, if I had known—" "If you had known I would be wealthy again, you would not have cast me aside," Eleanor finished, her tone level but cutting. "Or if you had known the king favoured me, you would have kept me rather than risk his displeasure. Which is it, Aldric?" Aldric flushed. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Eleanor asked. "Because from where I stand, you made your choices very clear. I was worthless to you without a fortune or an heir. You threw me out with almost nothing and replaced me within weeks. What could you possibly have to say to me now?" I made a mistake," Aldric said, and for the first time Eleanor heard genuine emotion in his voice. I was so focused on securing Blackstone's future, on having an heir, that I failed to see the value of the woman I had married. You were clever and capable, Eleanor. You managed the keep better than anyone before or since, and I cast you aside like you meant nothing. I did mean nothing to you, Eleanor said quietly. You made that abundantly clear. Aldrich looked down. I know, and I cannot undo it, but I wanted to tell you that I was wrong. You deserved better than I gave you. Eleanor felt Aldwin's hand find hers, his fingers warm and steady. The simple gesture reminded her that she had found better, that she had survived Aldrich's rejection and found love that valued her for herself. Thank you for saying so, Eleanor said. But Aldrich, your apology changes nothing. You hurt me deeply. You took away my home, my security, my very identity. I had to rebuild myself from nothing, and in doing so I found that I am stronger than you ever gave me credit for. I can see that, Aldrich said softly, looking at her standing beside the king. You are magnificent, Eleanor. You always were. I was simply too blind to see it. Then I hope you have learned to see more clearly, Eleanor said. How is your wife, Lady Rosalind? Aldrich's expression tightened. She is well. We are managing. No heir yet? Eleanor asked and saw him flinch. Perhaps the physicians were right after all, that such things are often a matter of chance, or the husband's failure as much as the wife's. Aldwin's hand squeezed hers in quiet support. Aldrich's face had gone pale. I hope you find happiness eventually, Aldrich, Eleanor continued. I truly do. But that happiness will not include my forgiveness. You will have to live with what you did, just as I have had to live with it. The difference is that I have moved beyond it. I have found love and respect and a future brighter than anything I imagined. Can you say the same? Aldrich was silent for a long moment. No, he finally said. I cannot. He bowed again. I will take my leave. Your Majesty, Lady Eleanor, I wish you both happiness in your marriage. As Aldrich left, Eleanor felt something release in her chest, a weight she had been carrying for months without realizing it. She had faced the man who had broken her and shown him that she had not only survived, but thrived. It was not revenge exactly, but it was closure. Aldwin pulled her into his arms. Are you all right? Yes, Eleanor said, surprised to find it true. I am. He has no power over me anymore, Aldwin. He's just a man who made poor choices and has to live with them. A man who lost something precious through his own foolishness, Aldwin murmured. His loss is my gain, though I wish you had not had to suffer to bring you to me. Eleanor looked up at him. I think perhaps I needed that suffering. It taught me my own strength. It showed me that I could survive anything, and it brought me here, to you. Then I'm grateful for the journey, Aldwin said, even as I regret the pain it caused you. He kissed her forehead gently. 3 more weeks and you will be my queen. Are you ready? Eleanor thought about everything she had been through, the rejection and poverty, the long road to Riverstone, the months of work as a servant, the restoration of her fortune, and finally, the love of a good man who saw her true worth. She thought about the woman she had been at Blackstone Keep, uncertain, diminished, believing herself worthless. And she thought about the woman she was now, strong, confident, loved. Yes, she said, I'm ready. The wedding day arrived with perfect summer weather. Bright sun and clear skies, a warm breeze carrying the scent of roses from the palace gardens. Eleanor woke early, her heart fluttering with anticipation and nerves. Today she would become queen. Anne and Margaret helped her dress in the magnificent wedding gown that had been created for the occasion. White silk embroidered with gold thread, pearls sewn into the bodice, a train that stretched for yards behind her. They pinned her hair up in an intricate style, wove flowers through the dark strands, and placed the delicate crown of gold and diamonds that marked her as queen-to-be. "You look like something from a fairy tale," Anne said, her eyes bright with tears. "I feel like I'm in a dream," Eleanor admitted. "Part of me keeps expecting to wake up back in my small room at Lord Pemberton's, folding linens." "That was real," Margaret said firmly, "and so is this. You earned both, my lady. Never forget that." The ceremony took place in the great cathedral, with hundreds of nobles and common folk crowding in to witness. As Eleanor walked down the aisle on Lord Pemberton's arm, he had agreed to stand in place of her late father. She saw the faces turn toward her. Some were friendly, some curious, some still skeptical. But at the end of the aisle stood Aldwyn, resplendent in his royal robes, his eyes locked on her with such love and joy that nothing else mattered. The bishop performed the ceremony, his voice echoing through the cathedral. Eleanor spoke her vows clearly, promising to love and honor Aldwyn, to serve the realm as queen, to bear the responsibilities that came with the crown. Aldwyn's vows were equally clear, his voice steady and sure. When the bishop pronounced them married and crowned Eleanor as queen, the cathedral erupted in cheers. Aldwyn pulled her close and kissed her, and Eleanor felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. "My queen," Aldwyn whispered against her lips. "My love." "My king," Eleanor whispered back. "My heart." The celebration lasted 3 days. Feasts and tournaments, balls and concerts, all the pageantry that attended a royal wedding. Eleanor moved through it all with grace, learning to wear the crown both literally and figuratively. She spoke with nobles and common folk, accepted their congratulations and occasional criticisms, showed them that she was worthy of being their queen. On the 3rd night, when the last of the guests had finally departed and they were alone in their chambers, Aldwyn helped Eleanor remove the heavy crown and pins from her hair. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Being queen?" Eleanor considered the question. "Terrifying, overwhelming, wonderful." She turned to face him. "But mostly, it feels right. Like I've finally found where I'm meant to be." Aldwyn pulled her close, and Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," he said softly. "Not as a king loves his queen, but as a man loves his wife. You are my partner, my equal, my greatest treasure." "And you are mine," Eleanor replied. "You saw me when I was nothing and loved me anyway. You gave me back myself, Aldwyn. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." They stood there in the quiet of their chamber, holding each other while the city celebrated beyond the palace walls. Eleanor thought of how far she had come. From the fortress where she had been cast aside to the palace where she was now queen. The journey had been hard, had broken her and remade her, but it had brought her here, to love, to purpose, to home. In the months and years that followed, Eleanor proved herself an excellent queen. She worked alongside Aldwyn to strengthen the realm, used her knowledge of estate management to improve royal revenues, and became beloved by the common people for her kindness and accessibility. She never forgot where she had come from, never forgot the months she had spent working as a servant, and she used those experiences to better understand the lives of ordinary subjects. Word eventually reached them that Aldric's marriage to Rosalind had produced a daughter but no son, and that Blackstone Keep struggled financially despite the Thornfield dowry. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in this news, only a distant pity for the man who had traded love for ambition and found neither. She visited her father's restored estates several times a year, ensuring they were well managed and prosperous. She endowed a school there in her father's memory, teaching both noble and common children to read and cipher. It became her legacy, her way of honoring the man who had taught her the value of justice and loyalty. And through it all, Aldwyn was beside her, steady, loving, seeing her truly in a way that Aldrich never had. They did not have children, but they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. One evening, 5 years after their wedding, Elinor stood on the palace balcony, looking out over Riverstone. Aldwin came to stand beside her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life is from what I imagined," Elinor said. "When I left Blackstone Keep, I thought my life was over. I never dreamed I would end up here, as queen, loved and valued." "The best things in life are often the ones we never planned for," Aldwin said. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Elinor, my unexpected queen." Elinor turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting love and promise and the future they had built together. "And you were mine, my unexpected king." Below them, the city lights twinkled like stars, and in the distance Elinor could just make out the road that led south toward Blackstone Keep. The fortress, where she had once believed she would spend her life, where she had been broken and cast aside. She did not regret that road anymore. Every step of that painful journey had been necessary to bring her here, to teach her strength, to show her worth, to lead her to love. Aldrich had kicked her out of his fortress, thinking her worthless, unaware that he was casting aside a future queen, his loss, her gain, and she had never been happier. Elinor smiled and leaned into Aldwin's embrace, feeling the warm summer breeze and the solid strength of the man who loved her. She was home, not in a place, but in love, and that was worth more than all the fortresses in the kingdom.